Good afternoon, and I wanted to first remind you of something Greg mentioned earlier in the day, that this get-together is part or represents part of a project that has been ongoing at the Peace Research Institute Oslo for about almost 40 years. And it includes some reports on the topic that we were struggling with, which was not pacem in terra specifically, or war and threats to peace specifically, so much as what particularly artificial intelligence as an emerging sort of presence in military operations and other kinds of things like planning and so forth, cyber operations. What that did or might do or might threaten to do to the well-being of the, as we call them, the end users, the people at the pointy end of the spear, or the people who were, involved in incorporating and using and trying to control and predict the outcome of this new technology. So that's what got us started. And I think that means that this panel, in a way, puts the issue of other threats to peace not as a statement or as a description, but as a question. The question would be, is artificial intelligence itself generally a threat to peace? A lot of people think it's a threat to all kinds of things, and others think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened, and we need all of it we can get. How about artificial intelligence or AI enabled or enhanced, or weapon systems themselves? Are those weapon systems a threat to peace? Question mark. Or do they make war safer, less likely? And I'm not putting it that way to prejudice your attitudes about this, but to say we really don't know the answer to those questions, and that's not very comforting. So in addition to the impact of AI on its users in various contexts, including the military, we have the questions of whether the advent of AI represents a new threat. And that's puzzling because if you stop and think about it, AI and AI-enabled weapon systems have been around for quite some time without this question ever getting, really, to my knowledge, discussed or raised. Kind of like global warming, they've been around for, a long time. Global warming, maybe a century or more at least, not longer. And AI-enabled weaponry goes back 40 or 50 years. It's just that nobody really noticed, because there wasn't that much going on until all of a sudden, as our mathematicians could remind us, any good exponential function behaves in this fashion. It kind of slumbers under the radar and all of a sudden takes off like a jet plane, goes from nothing to almost an infinite acceleration and velocity before you know it. And that's the problem. When it does that, it's almost already too late. So we're looking at this panel on, the things that have suddenly popped into our consciousness, shown up on the battlefield or in the strategy room or the wargaming room, and wondering, golly, did we let this kind of rumble along, or do we have time to get control of it before it takes off? Well, my little piece of this is algorithmic warfare, which is a new term of art. The term was coined by Dr. Alex Karp of the US-based Palantir Engineering, and it designates the use of his firm's latest artificial intelligence software system, known as Meta Constellation, to dramatically enhance C2, command and control, and overall battlefield management. This public-private partnership has been championed between the Army, including the Army of Ukraine, and the US Army and NATO, and Palantir, by the outgoing chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark A. Milley of the Army. This is the keystone of his Army Vantage program, this public-private cooperation on the use of artificial intelligence. That program seeks to harness commercial big data analytics to improve information integration, informed tactical decision-making, and effective enemy targeting on the battlefield. Well, those increased public-private partnerships are also leading to AI-driven big data analytics being adopted to significantly improve things like cybersecurity and engage more effectively in conflict with adversaries in that domain. In both domains and others as well, AI-enabled operations include rapid response, retaliation, and even preemptive strikes well beyond the reach of meaningful human control, and have those supplanting the more conventional defense and cyber defense measures. These in turn have encouraged and enabled a shift in our strategy in NATO and the US from defensive, you may have noticed, to an increasingly offensive and preventive, I would call it, preventive posture. With regard to cyber, Professor Dinesh will be speaking on that in a moment. In the conventional battlefield and in other cases as well, the unique legal and ethical challenges resulting from this kind of disruptive innovation goes beyond the kind of legitimate concerns you have over, well, in cyber, you'd have them over privacy and civil liberties. In conventional war, you'd have them over violations, potential violations of discrimination and proportionality, military necessity. And all of that is jeopardized, those exceeding or disrupting of boundaries, through a greater reliance on potentially unstable entrepreneurial partnerships, which increase prospects for emergent and unpredictable machine behaviors and crisis responses. And they encourage and enable increasingly reckless operations by authoritarian regimes, we've seen. The term algorithmic warfare itself pertains to the current use of Palantir's AI big data platform MetaConstellation to integrate unimaginably massive and diverse data sets, from satellites and cell phones to local observations and photos that people take out of their backyard, to dramatically enhance command and control at the platoon and divisional level on the Ukrainian war front. General Milley calls this the technological tenacity. And in Ukraine's current example, what is meant by that is this weird combination we're seeing of World War I trench warfare, but with 21st century digital upgrades like nothing else we've seen heretofore. Adaptability in the field of combat is enabled by what Milley and the Ukrainians call digital interoperability. Enormous and diverse data inputs of all kinds integrated into a single operational framework for the commander on the ground in real time, up to the second. General Milley believes this is going to be the future of warfare. But as I sometimes skeptically remark, every new technology like this seems like it's going to be the future of warfare, if it is until it is. So is this one we should be concerned about? This one, some of you followed this kind of development in, particularly in the U.S. The U.S. Department of Defense's so-called Project Maven, which was one that was intended to foster these partnerships, but instead really outraged the employees at Google, Facebook, and other tech firms, private civilian tech firms. Perhaps it's angered some of you at this conference. For his part, Dr. Karp has countered that MetaConstellation has proven dramatically successful in also uncovering things like human trafficking, finding exploited children, and unraveling complex financial crime. Palantir, the company, boasts that its technology enables humanitarian response organizations to direct resources more effectively toward communities affected by natural disasters, such as occurred these past few days in Libya and Morocco. It helps public prosecutors build stronger cases against commercial insider traders, and it enables public health officials to track and contain the spread of deadly diseases. We go back to our conversations about COVID and Wuhan lab a few moments ago. Just one more comment on the cyber domain, which is not my area for this talk, but I do want to remark that AI-enabled operations include rapid response retaliation and even preemptive strikes, so-called hacking back, that would otherwise prove well beyond the reach of meaningful human detection, response, and control. These innovations are rapidly supplanting more conventional defense measures. This past spring, for example, I participated in a panel at the University of Pennsylvania's Carey Law School with several of really world-leading prominent international lawyers. I was the sole philosophy ethics guy on the panel. We were discussing the transformation and the legal and moral challenges that accompany them. And one big concern that the lawyers raised was that these AI-augmented innovations have encouraged and enabled a shift in the strategy of the U.S. and NATO from defensive, as I mentioned, to an increasingly offensive and preventive posture. And that last word should ring some bells of ethical concern, especially among just war theorists, but also among international lawyers. Once again, for example, are we able to ensure, perhaps by relying solely on what is called explainable AI, are we able to ensure that we ourselves understand and to the greatest extent remain in control and fully accountable for resulting operations? That is a dimension of what's often called the trust issue with AI that takes kind of two forms. It takes that form, namely, can we trust our algorithms? But in a different sense, this public-private partnership with AI raises a second trust issue. I mentioned the fostering of greater reliance on what I called potentially unstable entrepreneurial partnerships. And here's an example. Consider Elon Musk, always a reliable, steady, and dependable partner. Consider his mega constellation, not meta, but mega constellation, Starlink, a constellation of satellites. These ended up after the Russian initially launched cyber attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure and communications. Starlink became the essential data source for providing things like cell phone and internet service in the wake of Russian destruction of that local infrastructure. But of course, that meant it was also providing essential data on the battlefield in Ukraine. And I'm not entirely sure at first that Mr. Musk was entirely cognizant of that fact. Last year, in any case, you may remember he demanded increased financial contributions from the government or threatened to suspend the service. Again, he was referring primarily to things like cell phone and internet and television, other kinds of communications. He said, look, I'm the only private person who's being asked, or a company that's being asked to foot the bill. All the other defense contractors get paid for their work. So he demanded increased financial contributions, or he threatened to suspend service. Well, that would have been a hardship in itself for Ukrainians already living with unimaginable hardship, but it would have disrupted the military operations as well. And this year, he did disrupt military operations. There was an attempt by the Ukrainian Navy, you may have read about this just a few weeks ago, Ukrainian Navy and the intelligence services launched and controlled, piloted 5 unmanned submarines into the Crimean area in an attempt, or their plan was, to sabotage the entire Russian fleet in Sevastopol. And he turned off the signal for the reason that I think is plausible and defensible. I didn't intend my Starlink mega constellation satellite service to be used for anything other than peaceful and humanitarian purposes. And I sure as hell didn't want it to be used to, to launch, in effect, an operation that might in turn trigger World War III. Again, that's not an unreasonable position. The problem is, who is Elon Musk to be making these decisions? The guy who gave you Twitter, that's now X. I mean, this is not how it's supposed to, this is not how C2 is supposed to work. I also suggested that the public-private enterprise here might increase prospects for emergent and unpredictable machine behaviors and crisis responses, and enable increasingly reckless cyber operations by authoritarian regimes of the sort that we saw by Iran in 2019 when it attacked Israeli water treatment facilities. So there's all kinds of possibilities, if you will, of things going off the rail. Of course, the legal and ethical debate over proactive preventive self-defense long predates the introduction of AI enhancements, but AI vastly increases the capability of security forces to engage in strategies depending on preventive or preemptive self-defense, and enables private and commercial firms to join government forces in retaliations, especially in the cyber domain, on the simple ground that the best defense is a good offense. Are we sure, I guess, and I'll wind up with this question, are we sure we want to encourage this? I know some of my colleagues over at Georgetown in the Center for Security and Emerging Technology really worry about this. They've worried about the offensive operations incorporating the kind of AI we're talking about could result in unforeseen system failures, cascading effects, and trigger accidental escalation. They worry, in addition, that the systems are insecure themselves, inadequately trained, and sometimes misapplied for the wrong kind of problems. And they could just inject bad information into decision-making processes that would also ultimately lead to inadvertent escalation. And discovery of the compromise of an AI system could generate uncertainties about the reliability or survivability of critical capabilities that might drive decision makers witnessing this in advance to deliberate escalation if that conflict appears imminent. It's all very disconcerting. But I want to make a couple of concluding remarks. First, the public-private partnerships are being described as unprecedented, but that's not true. If we look at early military history, they're in fact reinvigorating policies and debates that took place in international relations and international law many centuries ago, long before Max Weber established that the use of deadly force was inherently government function alone. In maritime history, think of the use of privateers, letters of marque, government licensing of private corporations like Great Britain's East India Company to protect their own operations from attack by political enemies as well as pirates, and to engage in preventive offensive measures against those same adversaries. The trick was they could do that and protect their property, but they couldn't, like, for example, go after competitors like Spain or the Dutch and declare unilateral private war on them. So there was already in the 17th and 18th centuries anomalous measures like this and ways of interpreting them that, if you weren't careful, could serve as a casus belli, a case for war. And that was a very interesting and problematic problem for the infant American nation during the Napoleonic Wars, for example. The trick is that now, instead of days, weeks, or months, we're looking at operations that take place in minutes or seconds. Could that quickly entail responses, including a declaration of war that wasn't intended? How can we protect against these eventualities. Let me let the alarm sound and ring up. I just want to make this concluding set of observations. I think it's interesting, this use of AI on battlefield management flattens the hierarchy between command and control. Platoon and even company commanders can make decisions and manage flexible operations without requiring the lengthy review and approval further up what is usually a very sclerotic chain of command, certainly in the Russian case. And you've seen how that flexibility has helped Ukraine withstand a more sizable and militarily well-equipped enemy. Secondly, flattening of the hierarchy dissolves the distinction and traditional boundaries between strategy and tactics, planning and execution. That rapid increase of operational tempo is something that was commented on back in the Afghan war by General McChrystal, and said we need to distribute more horizontally our command and control even in those cases. And now we're seeing it in Ukraine. Well, oddly enough, that represents a challenge for conventional just war and military ethics, where those distinctions essentially are jus in bello ad bellum distinctions. Those will break down. The great philosopher Alistair MacIntyre commented on this years ago in his keynote address for the opening of the International Society of Military Ethics at the University of Notre Dame. Yeah, wrap it up. And so finally, in contrast to other technological innovations, with AI, we see the ethics flag raised and flown by the new conflict commanders themselves. Ethics is supposedly baked into AI innovations from the outset. That's a novel development. I'm not sure what you think about it. We're used to dragging the military into talking about ethics. Now they're leading the discussion. Is that all PR, building of trust, or is it the recognition that ethical AI is the most effective tool to deploy?